Hello everyone, welcome back to the 5-Minute Tech channel. Today we'll be talking about API versioning in .NET 10. The topics which we'll be covering will be Asp.Versioning, OpenAPI, Swagger UI, Scalar, and API linting in action. We will be talking about how the important is versioning your API, which can lead from a slow adoption problem to a fast evolution. So let's get started. Why versioning matters? There is a cost associated with change. APIs evolve rapidly, but clients do not upgrade instantly. It happens over a period of time, and this disconnect creates a dangerous gap in contract expectations. There is the adoption lag, which involves a mobile app, some third-party partner integration, which often lags weeks or months behind the server releases. Then there is a breaking hazards, the renaming of fields, removing of properties, or changing your error semantics can cause immediate client failures. And then there is a preserving trust factor. Versioning allows the server to evolve safely while maintaining the stability pact with the legacy consumers. And so versioning is the catalyst for safe evolution and sustained developer trust. What counts as a breaking change? So breaking changes would be something like removing or renaming an endpoint or field, which could break the API. It could be changing the response shapes or meanings that could also break the API. And then the non-breaking changes would be something like adding optional field, which is usually non-breaking. Versioning strategies. So there are different ways and you can do the versioning, or you can follow a strategy of versioning your APIs. One is through a URL path versioning. The version is embedded in your URL itself. The second is a query string versioning, in which you pass the API version as a query parameter. And the third one is your custom header versioning, which is in which you can pass the headers like X API version and pass the version in there. There is a fourth option as well, where you can pass the media type versioning, where you, along with your the accept attribute, you can pass it as your API version. So we will talk about the .NET tooling. ASP versioning is what we are going to talk about. I'll be showcasing it in a demo, where in the version 10 integration, the version 10 integrates with Microsoft ASP.NET Core.OpenAPI and generates OpenAPI per version. OpenAPI documentation can now be generated per API version with app.map OpenAPI and with document per version method. This removes a lot of older custom plumbing that teams need to do with the previous setups. Now, what packages do we want and how it integrates into the .NET ecosystem? So for example, in minimal API functionality or scope, you will have the package which is ASP.NET, ASP.Versioning.http. Controllers, if you have the functionalities where you're using the specific controllers, then you will use ASP.Versioning.MVC. Version aware API exploration, for that you will use ASP.Versioning.MVC.API Explorer. Version aligned OpenAPI generation, wherein you have the OpenAPI generation in place. You will be using ASP.Versioning.OpenAPI, and the .NET's built-in OpenAPI pipeline if you are using Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.OpenAPI. Now, the high-level architecture of this whole system in which you create the versioning of API involves your either ways, whether you're using a minimal API or a controller, where you provide the versioning configuration. ASP.Versioning based configuration, which is API Explorer, that is version aware, or per version OpenAPI docs. After that, you will have your OpenAPI viewers, which is Swagger UI and Scalar, which will be seen in our demo. And then you could have a quality gate and governance, which will involve your linting process, which involves Spectral, and that will give you a password field in the lint which you have configured. This diagram, which we have just talked about, shows versioning is not just a route matching, it drives your documentation and the governance as well. Now, in the real world scenario, as I talked about, we will be talking about a demo. And we'll be talking about user APIs, the V1 version of it, and subsequently also there will be a V2 version which we can consume. So how does the OpenAPI per version work? You have V1 consumers as well as V2 consumers. V1 consumer continue to call your API/V1 and the V2 consumer calls your API/V2. And in your map OpenAPI method, which has the extension with document per version, you have a separate doc for per version. Now all these versions could be named as V1 contract JSON or V2 contract JSON subsequently based on the nomenclature you want to follow. Now each of this will have the specific path mapping as well as any definitions which might be differing from each other. This matters because it ensures each consumer sees only the contract that matches the specific version they are calling and not the otherwise. The Swagger UI for versioned API, you can configure the Swagger in UI, which is pretty a well-known way of exposing your endpoints. Now you will have your config.cs and registers endpoint for each described API version, and then you will have the Swagger view. In the demo, we will be showing the Swagger and we will be switching between the V1 and V2. Now version OpenAPI documentation, as I talked about, we will be showcasing the application launched in the browser, and you can switch between different versions. The version selector is at the top right corner where you can switch which version you want to refer to. Now calling the same endpoint in both versions, compare the payload, and we can see that it could be a differing payload coming in different version. Scalar for version APIs. The Scalar is another way in which you can view the APIs and trigger the APIs. You configure the Scalar with version docs, map Scalar UI with generated document, register multiple API versions, and define separate endpoints for each doc. The modern API experience comes with the Scalar UI. Instead of old JSON payload and trying it out button, read to modern clean UI details to highlight the modern feel and comparison. The modern V1 API acts as the exploration view, and each version provides detailed interactive resource views. And that's how you can do exploration of V1 and V2 separately as well in the Scalar UI. Now, difference between Swagger UI and Scalar, which we talked about both of them right now. Now, Swagger is very common in our .NET environment, and Scalar is newer but modern and polished. We'll be showcasing that, talking about it in our demo. And then Swagger UI is strong for ad hoc testing workflows, whereas Scalar is strong for modern API documentation browsing. And Swagger UI works with multiple endpoints per version, and Scalar works with multiple added documents per version. So we'll see this in detail. Now let's talk about how turning a standard into automated checks work and how it is beneficial. So Spectral is the OpenAPI linter, and it is as a basic rule set can start with extents like a Spectral OAS, and we can run the Spectral lint against generated docs during your build or CI pipeline. So the way it works is you provided certain specific rules, and if that rule fails, it returns you the error. And that is the quality gate that you can put in place in your CI/CD pipeline to make sure that your APIs are adhering to a particular standard. Now, lint rule that matters in real scenario, which is like operational details. Every operation must have summary and description, so that can be a lint rule. Versioning configuration convention. You can version document must follow naming and path conventions. Your public API quality. So public endpoint must have tags, examples, and operation IDs. Then it will be easier for the consumers. And custom rule set. Your organization rules and the document rules and the URL versioning or other organizational rules can be enforced with your custom rule set. Now, real world release workflow, how will it work when you have an API versioning in place? If there is a feature update, we add a non-breaking feature, for example, optional field to current version when possible. You fork the major version, you create V1, it is unsupported, and the breaking change, that is V2, that is new major. Create a new major API version for the breaking change, and especially we have talked about the major version here. So there is a change in the major version. On multi-version document, we create V1, V2 contracts, publish a separate OpenAPI doc for each supported version. Then there is an interactive viewer, and you can see we need to enable that. Expose the version doc in the Swagger UI and Scalar. And in the CI pipeline gates, you apply your linting rules, the link and the diff docs in the CI before the release. So this is the whole way the release workflow will work. Some of the common pitfalls are we start versioning very late into the system. We realize that there could be different consumers with different changes needed over a period of time. So that is one common pitfall we have across industry. Then we have the other pitfall is mixing multiple versioning styles without a clear standard. Standard should be defined like beforehand rather than an afterthought. Generating docs that do not match real routed behavior. Forgetting deprecation, communication, and support windows. You need to inform the consumers well in advance, and then treating OpenAPI as documentation only instead of a validation artifact. These are some of the common pitfalls. And some of the key takeaways from this session is using your use API.versioning for route and version behavior. Use .NET 10 OpenAPI integration for clean per version docs. Use Swagger UI or Scalar, whichever works, to improve discoverability, and use spectral and related checks to enforce quality in the CI pipeline. Now let's switch off to the demo and see how this works in action. So now we are in the Visual Studio Code, and we will go ahead and create a new solution file, and we can do it through command line. So I'll just open the terminal and I will run this command line. Creates the solution file, and I'll go ahead and in the source folder we'll go ahead and add the project file. We'll go ahead and add the code for the project file. So we are having the reference for Asp.Versioning HTTP, versioning MVC API Explorer, because I'll be showing in multiple ways the APIs versions, and then the Asp.Versioning OpenAPI. As per my demonstration, you could use some of them or either of them depending on what your need is. I'm also using Scalar.asp.NET Core along with the swashbuckle reference. One correction, I have moved this inside the folder API versioning demo.api, and then I have placed the CS project inside it. We'll go ahead and add the program file, program.cs file. Program.cs file will have the reference from the Asp.Versioning Asp.Versioning along with certain project areas which I will be implementing. I'll go ahead and add these folders, which will be what I will be referring in my program.cs. So I have added common code area, contracts, domain, endpoints, and OpenAPI along with services. So we'll create certain files here which will make this API user API work. So let's go ahead and add those changes. So in common folder we have API tags wherein we are tagging certain APIs for health, user, and orders. This is important in the production wherein you apply the tags to the APIs. Now the contracts are, we have defined two contracts, the V1 and V2, order response V1 and user response V1, and then we have order response V2 and user response V2. You see there is a substantial difference in terms of amount of the response properties which will be resulting out. Now domain will have certain properties which may be consistent or change internally, and there will be certain wiring which we will be doing through our services. So in the we have interface for that is for orders, that is I order service, and then we have order service which parses the. Here I have hard coded the data, but in actual scenario this data will be coming from something like a database. And similarly for user service as well, here it will be hard coded, but we will probably be having it from an actual database. And then we have something like your wiring, which as I mentioned, there will be an endpoint wiring. We will have specific endpoints hooked up to the specific API calls, and this is where you can tie up your APIs to the specific endpoints by using endpoint definition area like an endpoint. So here this is the orders API endpoint, wherein I have defined certain APIs related to orders, API orders, then a simple GUID based get, and then we have the user endpoints, which is again the API/users list, and then we also have something called as the Swagger UI extension and the Scalar extension, which we have defined. Now these extensions will help us in plugging the Swagger UI and the Scalar into our application through the wiring which we can do in our program CS. So if you see here, we are doing our plugging in of our interfaces with the services, and also about our Swagger plugging in along with the Scalar. So let's go ahead and run this application and see how it is behaving and working. Let's open the new terminal and run the application. So we need to probably first switch into our API project and do all these. So let me try again. .NET clean, .NET build, and then .NET watch. So it should be loading the application now, and it is showing as localhost 50,000. Let's launch this application and see. So as you see, we have 4 windows open now. We will be seeing the version 1, and if you see, if you want to see the v2, you can go ahead and see the v2 as well of the users APIs. So in the users API, if you want to try it out, you can do version 1. It's API version 1, and you should be able to get the result like this. Now I have to launch the another one, which is API v2, and in this, if you go ahead and try it out, and you will be able to select 2, and the response you will get will be more number of parameters or attributes coming back as a response. Similarly, in the Scalar, you would be able to test your request, and you can send the request to the user for the user API call, and as you see, you're getting 2 attributes coming back to you, whereas in v2, the Scalar v2, if you test the request, you will be able to see more amount of response coming back from the API. So this is how you will be able to configure the version in your APIs and use different tools to get the response back and make it work in your system. I hope you liked the video. If you like the video, press like and subscribe to the channel. Have a nice day.